Hey guys, welcome back. So we're getting back into Symbiote Spider-Man Alien Reality, and we've come to the place to where Peter's been pushed to the point to where now he's ready to study the mystic arts, face the Hobgoblin, and right what has gone so wrong in this reality. But on top of that, we also have a symbiote issue which is lurking underneath, but then also the issue of time. With the Hobgoblin hunting for Peter and Doctor Strange, they can't necessarily hide and train forever. Or can they? So let's get into it. But first, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week. And don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squad up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so jumping right back in, not long after the Hobgoblin, who tracked down Peter using a locator spell, which led him to find Peter and attack him in the home of Uncle Ben and Aunt May. This attack of the Hobgoblin then led to the death of Aunt May, which brought a very abrupt ending to what for Peter felt like a new beginning, with having his aunt and uncle both back together for the first time in a long time. But after this, with Natasha showing up shortly after, Peter then rushed back to Doctor Strange so that he could begin his training. And when that happened, throughout the course of time, which was roughly about a week, the Hobgoblin had been looking everywhere for Peter and Doctor Strange, and with doing so, once again using his locator spell, but still coming up with nothing. And when he returns back to the Sanctum, he vents to Juan for a little bit, but ultimately at this point, the Hobgoblin cannot figure out where Peter and Strange had made their way off to, even in this reality, where the both of them are cloaked to his sight. And when we get back to the two of them, we see how Doctor Strange has resolved this issue, because not long after Peter had met him back on the rooftop, from there Strange had then taken Peter and Natasha to Carnage, which is actually the perfect place, with it being guarded from mystical detection, but also for other reasons which we'll cover once they make their way inside. But not long after they arrive there, they're attacked by Morbius, who at this point in time within Spider-Man's history is around like not long after issue 102, which we had talked about a few months back when I did a video about some of the strange dark history of Michael Morbius, to where well before he started jumping into alternate dimensions, he got in a face-off between Spider-Man and the Lizard, and at this point in both of their history, that's the last Peter that Morbius remembers seeing. But when he pops up on them here, Natasha's able to distract him for a moment with a gas bomb, which then gives the three of them like just enough time to make their way into Carnage, or at least within the protective field surrounding it, which then leaves Morbius outside looking like the coyote trying to chase the Roadrunner. But even when they get inside, Morbius is outside yelling and screaming like you can take as long as you want, because he can literally wait for hundreds of years if that's as long as it takes. And when they're inside, Peter mentions that Morbius is dangerous, but he's no Dracula, which is something that Doctor Strange can agree to, because at this point he has met and killed Dracula. And in fact, by this point in time, I believe Strange has fought Dracula at least a couple times. Or better yet, thinking back, I think it was like one time, and it was like a crossover between The Tomb of Dracula, issue 44, and Doctor Strange, Master of the Mystic Arts, issue 14. And they both came out the same year in 1976, and at the time they led us to a duel to the death between Doctor Strange and Dracula. Oh, and I want to say that Blade popped up in there somewhere too. But from here, getting back to Symbiote Spider-Man, now that they've all made their way to Carnage, that'll not only keep them hidden indefinitely without Strange having to continue to use the Ring of Zona, but also with the addition that time passes different within Carnage, which means that a year in here is roughly a week in the real world. And with having this extra time, this is what Strange is going to use to teach Peter the mystical arts. And so when they get here, Strange first tells the two of them to get some rest, because they got plenty of time now, but so that afterwards the next day, Peter can get to his training. But what happens that night when they're getting some rest, the symbiote then takes Peter back outside, which for Morbius was only like seconds later. But the symbiote had did this in order to protect Peter and eliminate the threat of Morbius, much like we had seen in the previous Symbiote Spider-Man series, back when Mysterio had hired the mutant Hard Rock to kill Spider-Man so he could take his suit. And back then within this retelling, we saw the same thing happen, which was crazy to watch but amazing at the same time. But also with us seeing the symbiote take this protective role once again, in addition to that, we're once again given the idea that there's more that the symbiote is trying to do. And we see that when we get back to Carnage, because the symbiote, it didn't blow up Morbius like it did Hard Rock, which once again was nasty. But back at Carnage, the fight between Morbius and the symbiote, it was cut short by Doctor Strange, who had immediately noticed that Peter was missing, and he had came out looking for Peter shortly after. But it's here where Strange uses the Ring of Zona to get Morbius out of there. It didn't take long for him to realize that he wasn't talking to Spider-Man. But on top of the whole protection for Peter Parker thing, it's also here where Strange understands that there's more. Because even though the symbiote doesn't verbally respond back to Strange, he immediately gets that the symbiote was trying to run away with Peter Parker because it feared that if Peter had learned the mystic arts, then he would have no use for the symbiote. but it's here where Strange assures Peter that he'll only teach him defensive skills as long as the symbiote brings Peter back and allows him to go through with his training. And with hearing this, the symbiote agrees and he follows Strange back to Carnage. But in the case of Peter's training within this year only being defensive moves, this wasn't something that Doctor Strange had did only for the sake of the symbiote, but he had also made this decision in order to maximize this year which they were spending here. But on top of that, he did let the symbiote know that whatever Peter would learn here, the symbiote would learn as well. And when this is all over, the symbiote can do whatever with that knowledge that it wishes. And so now after this year, after Peter's training was done, they then leave Carnage and go back into the world, which is still within this alternate reality. And with doing so, before they confront Hobgoblin, Peter tests out a few of his new skills. But even with doing this, they don't spend a whole lot of time like in this alternate reality fighting crime, but rather this is just done on their way back into the city, to where when they arrive back, they catch Doc Ock robbing a bank. And when he takes down Doc Ock here, who hasn't yet moved on to greater ambitions, but even at this time Ock does explain that he's robbing this bank in order to even have the funds to operate as a full-time criminal, because even as a villain you still gotta eat too, you can't just be stealing everything. But also with running into Ock here, they did get a bit of the notion that everybody believed that Spider-Man was gone, because more or less the word on the street was that the Hobgoblin killed him. But after this, they waste no time and they take the fight to the Sanctum Sanctorum in order to confront the Hobgoblin and catch him with the element of surprise. But I also gotta say, like with them getting here to the Sanctum Sanctorum, which they notice at this time is the hideout of the Hobgoblin, to whom also Peter refers to as Hobby every now and then, which is short for Hobgoblin. But with doing that, it just feels like a missed opportunity for Peter just to slip in a Hobby Lobby joke. And I'm not sure if you guys really got Hobby Lobbies wherever you're at, but if you've ever been into a Hobby Lobby, then you'd also notice some of the stuff in there looks like it belongs in the inner sanctum as well. But that's neither here nor there, I digress. But when they arrive here at the Sanctum Sanctorum, Natasha checks the door, and the first red flag is that Wong isn't there to greet her at the door. And when Doctor Strange sees this, he lets them know like they need to hold off because something isn't right. But even still, Peter's like, bump that, I've been waiting a whole year, and that's been long enough. We gotta get in there, get the book, and begin the course correction of this reality now. And when they get inside and find the Hobgoblin, he sees Spider-Man and he's like, man, where you been? I've been out here in these streets looking for you for weeks. But first of all, as we know, it hasn't been weeks, because the time that Peter's been gone, it's been relatively 1 week, at least for the Goblin, and for Peter a whole year. So when we hear the Hobgoblin say that, we know that he's exaggerating a bit. But in response to the Goblin wanting to see Spider-Man so bad, for Peter's first trick, he casts a spell which produces copies of himself everywhere. And when Peter does this, the Hobgoblin is appalled, because when he sees this, he's like, man, how dare you use magic? And at this point, the Goblin admits that he's not the Sorcerer Supreme, but he knows magic when he sees it. And to me, like, that's the equivalent of saying, well, I don't know how to play the guitar, but I know one when I hear it. And at that point, it's like, yeah, you and everyone else, bro. Like, somebody get a cookie for Captain Obvious here. But at this moment where Peter uses the Multiplicity Dictum spell, he uses it to cast a distraction for the Hobgoblin so that him and Nat can make their way to the inner sanctum. And with making their way there, Peter's in hopes that they'll find the Word of God so that they can snatch it up and make everything right. But when they arrive, they are then met by the true Sorcerer Supreme of this reality, who's also actually the brains behind all of this in the first place. And really, for some time, we knew it wasn't Hobgoblin, because really, he told on himself the first time he did a couple tricks, because we'd seen it and we was like, nah, you ain't that guy. But here in the inner sanctum, we find out that the true sorcerer behind this is Baron Mordo, and he just pops up on them like, you asked to see the boss and they sent me, dog. But really, with him arriving here, this is trouble, because Peter didn't train for this. And even on top of that, Peter didn't train to face off Baron Mordo, even not as Sorcerer Supreme. So in this moment, it's much like Peter jumping in the kiddie pool but falling 20,000 leagues under the sea. Like, he's in over his head, to say the least. But when this happens, he tries to tell Nat to get out of there, but she doesn't listen. She tries to take on Mordo as well, but instead Mordo just constrains her with her own grappling hook. But right after this, when Strange arrives, Mordo sees him and he doesn't think of him as a threat, and mainly because Strange is limited at this point to using artifacts. And when Strange gets here, Mordo's just like, chin up, I stole your drip, you big mad, go ahead and take your best shot. And it's here where Strange pulls another artifact, which isn't magical but still effective, but he just sprays him in the face with a can of mace, which caught him off guard and actually gave Strange a moment to reach for the Eye of Agamotto and peek into the mind of Baron Mordo so that he could find out where he hid the book, which is a very clutch move, and is one of the main reasons why Dr. Stephen Strange, he's the best to ever be Sorcerer Supreme. But of course with his time being limited to do this, and at this point in time, though we don't know how much he got to see, but immediately with doing this, he gets himself and Peter out of there. Which immediately of course may have you thinking, like, what about Nat, the red cat? To whom, as it turns out, when they left her behind, Baron Mordo, the Sorcerer Supreme, he then scoffs at her for leading Spider-Man and Doctor Strange there, because as it turns out, she had been working with him the whole time, which is one of the things that Strange had seen when he peeped into Mordo's mind, and it's also why he had taken Peter and left her there. And so now real quick, before we go, I want to give a special shout out to all the patrons. Thank you guys for all of your support. And for anyone that's new here and you'd like more information on how to support the channel, I got a link down below to where you can head to patreon.com/dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. So now at this point, we still got one more issue of Symbiote Spider-Man Alien Reality, and mainly with the series being put on hold with everything going on, and even some series down the line getting canceled. But hopefully that's not the case for Symbiote Spider-Man, and we get a lot more coming down the road. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again in the next one. Alright, later.